Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and this is another Wazoo Web Bytes video. Today we're going to be doing a to-do items app from scratch, from the very bottom, using Ruby on Rails. That's right. This is going to be pretty exciting. As you can see in front of me, I'm already logged in with a test account that I've set up, and we can see that I've got 3 to-do items right here. We can then click the new to-do item, enter a value for a new to-do item. Let's see, finish recording video. Create that up. We get a successful message that it was created. Back to our main list, and now we can see that it's been added to our list. We can then sign out, and we can sign in with a different demo account. User1 at user.com. Password. And you can see that we have a different set of to-do items that only relate to this user that we're signed in with. So we can then create a new one here. Let's say finishing other video. If I can just type correctly, hit that create, go back. We've got 2 items here. Let's see, I can edit it. To do 2. And it updates correctly. Everything looks really great. And that's about it for this demo. Yeah. So this is going to be really exciting. We'll get into this right away, right after this. Awesome. So we've zoomed in. We've got a task list here of some cards that I put together for what we want to create. So I want to be able to sign up as a new user. Didn't mean to open that. I want to sign in as said user. I want to only list the to-do items for the user. And I want to handle all of the CRUD methods for to-do items. So create, read, update, and delete, destroy. I want to update the basic layout that we get in a Rails app and just tweak up some of the HTML markup. And I want to include some tests. So I think that's a good list, a pretty good list of things that we can do for this application. So let's jump right into the terminal window on Windows 11. And let's get started building this. This might make it easier to see. Okay, so here we are on a terminal window on Windows 11. I'm using a WSL2 shell, Windows subsystem for Linux, but this is equally going to work on a Mac or straight up Linux box. So all we have to do here is what I want to do is the latest version of Ruby on Rails is version 7.0.4 as of recording this. But there's some minor hiccups between Rails 7 and the devise gem, which is what we're going to be using to handle user authentication, all of that sign up and registration stuff that I showed you in the demo. So in order to make sure that we're not doing too much fiddling with this app, I'm just going to build it using Rails 6. And then that way we won't have to do some funky workarounds for Rails 7, or if you run into issues on your machine, you won't be wondering if it's an incompatibility with Rails 7. So all of that out of the way, what we want to do here is I'm going to assume that you have at least Ruby installed on your available to you in the shell. So if you just type in ruby-v, hopefully a Ruby version comes up. I'm using Ruby 2.7.5, but I don't think I'm using anything that's terribly unique to a specific Ruby version. So you should be okay whichever version you're using. And for Rails, what we can do is you can type in gem list Rails --local. Whoops, too many dashes. --local, and it'll display all the versions of the Rails gem that you've got. And so notice here that I've got the latest 7.04, and I want to use 6.1.7 for this app that we're going to be building right now. So to do that, all we have to do is type in Rails _ 6.1.7, so whatever version you want to target, and then new Rails to do application -T. We want to skip the automatic generation of the mini test framework that the Rails generator includes, and we'll be using rspec later on in this application development. So let's use -t, which just skips the creation of all the test stuff because we'll be adding that in ourselves. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. And it'll run through installing all the gems we need, as well as setting up Webpacker for JavaScript, which we won't be using much or at all actually in this application. So we'll just let it finish installing everything. Okay, sweet, it's done. So let's go into the directory. So Rails to do, whoops. And it initializes the Git repo for us, which is really handy. So let's do a git status, and we can see all of the files that it created for us. And let's just go ahead and check everything in right now. We'll just call it initial commit, something like that. And to run our server, we can do so right away with Rails S or Rails server, whichever one you prefer. So let's try Rails server, and once in a while I'll be using Rails S. Whatever you want to get in the habit of using. And so notice the app is now listening on port 3000, which is the default port for all Ruby on Rails applications. So let's go back to our browser here, and let's go to port 3000. Hooray! We stop the server for now. We can leave it running, as I'll show you throughout this application. You can leave it running when you're making changes to your code, and it'll automatically rebuild for you. But for now, we're going to be doing some more stuff. So let's go back to our window, our terminal window, sorry, and let's now add, right away we're going to be adding the devise gem. So we can add it with bundle add devise, and it will run out to Ruby gems and install the specific version of devise that we want for our application. So let's go ahead, and we're going to be opening up this app in Ruby gems. Or not Ruby gems, sorry, rubymine. Okay, as you can see, we've opened up the app in rubymine, and we've got the application laid out for us. It looks a bit overwhelming because there's a lot of folders here that the Rails generator creates for us, but I think that's, as you work with Ruby on Rails, that becomes, I think, one of its strengths is that the main structure of a Ruby on Rails app looks the same no matter which one you're picking up. So it allows you to kind of not worry about where things go initially, and you can get to figuring out what the app is doing and where you need to make changes, etc. So you're worried less about structure, and then you can actually focus on the app itself. So all of our gems are stored in a file called Gemfile. So let's open it up here and let's take a look. And what I'm going to do first is just increase the font here. Okay, so we're opening up the Gemfile here, and let's take a look. Usually at the top of a Gemfile is the version of Ruby that generated said Gemfile. So you'll be seeing this in pretty much every Gemfile. We've got a whole bunch of default gems that come with the generator, and we can see at the bottom that it has now, Bundler has added the devise gem for us, and it's specifying it as version 4.8. So now what we need to do is go back to the terminal window, and we have to run a special function to just allow devise to set itself up. So we can use Rails generate or Rails G. G is short for generate. Devise : install. So it'll do a whole bunch of things, and it'll display a bunch of messages, or not a bunch, but it'll just display a message for you in the console here. So what we are gonna do is we are gonna update. We're gonna follow this example here, section 1. We're gonna be updating the config environments development RB file to add this line here. So let's go back into our editor and let's go to development config environments development RB, and let's go ahead and I just usually put it at the very bottom of the list here, and let's cut in the text that is displayed right here from the devise helper here. Yoink, done. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to commit what we've got. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we have to run another devise method here, another devise function, a helper function, to generate our user model. What we want to do is take advantage of all of the security and authentication work that's been put into the devise gem. So to do that, we just type in Rails G, Rails generate, devise, and we want to call our user account a user. You can call this account. Oops, which I did by accident. Oh well. So what we're going to do is now account represents our user account, which is also totally valid. So you can see here in the output that we've created a database migration for this new account, as well as the new model, the account model. And we've updated a new route in the routes file, which is the file that determines where to go in your application when you type in, depending on what you type in on the URL. That's embedded in the route file. We'll go through all of this as we work through this app. So let's first open up the migration. So this is changes to the database. Let's see, there we go. So devise, it'll create this file for you automatically with the timestamp of when you run this function, along with devise create accounts. So here by default, we've got a active record migration. We've got create a table accounts with email and encrypted password. That's pretty much the only information that we want to store on a user for the purposes of this app. Depending on what you're building, you might want to also add, first name, last name fields, address, etc. But for now, we're just going to be handling email and password. And you'll notice this. Okay, so we'll go through the types here. So a string, the email field is defined as a string type. The password field is also encoded as a string. And then down at the bottom, you'll notice that we've got a T timestamps field. And it'll be easier to show you what that's doing rather than explaining it. So we've got this migration here. So what we want to do is first update the database. Before that, we're going to run. We're going to run the application, and I'll show you what happens if you haven't yet updated your database with any migrations that are pending. So if we type in Rails S again, and go to our application, it'll give us a nice error message saying, uh-oh, you've got a pending migration, and here's exactly how to fix it. So go back to the terminal window, and let's Control-C to stop it, and then let's just type in bin rails, db migrate, rails env is development. It'll go and do its thing. So then if we go back, if we run Rails S again, everything should load up correctly. Hooray! We're not doing anything yet, but at least everything loads. So back to the code in our app. So what we want to do first is let's open up the routes file. And as I said, this is the file that Rails uses, to handle and process the URL requests that you're making on the request parameters to the app, the request routes in the browser to the app. So devise sets up its own ones here. It'll be easier to show how this routes file works as we add our to-do item model. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go back, let's stop the server, let's go back to the terminal window, and let's type in Rails generate, or G, scaffold to-do item. And what we want to do is we want to give a to-do item a title field. So we're going to add some more properties to it, but for now we're just going to add a title field. And by default, Rails will read this as a string type, so we can leave off string at the end, or you can include it if you want to get in the habit of doing that. It's your preference. Rails tries to do a lot for you by convention. So you can see here that we've got a whole bunch of things created for us from the generate scaffold helper method in Rails. We've got a new migration for the table. We've got a new model. We've got a addition to the routes file, and we've got a controller for the to-do items. We've got a whole bunch of views, and it's even added some CSS files that we can update later if we need to, which is all pretty handy. It's all pretty helpful. So if we go into if we refresh the routes.rb file, you'll see that we've now got a new addition called resources and then to-do items. So how does this actually work? So if we drop down to the terminal window again, we can use a command called Rails routes. So Rails routes will go through your application, and it'll basically display all of the valid URLs that your application will handle. So the list is pretty long, pretty difficult to kind of parse if you're not used to seeing this. So what we can do is filter this down by Rails routes and then a vertical bar and grep to-do item, to-do underscore item. So now we should get just the to-do item URLs that we care about. So we've got a get all request, so all of the to-do items. We've got post, which will create. We've got patch, which is basically patch or put. So if we've got the ID of the to-do item we want to update, we can use that on the URL and it'll handle this as an update. Or if we want to pass in a delete request to delete the to-do item that we pass in on the URL. So notice how each of these methods, or each of these action handlers, sorry, has a hashtag and then a method name. It is a method name. I'll show you in just one second where it's being mapped to, but notice that there's a name after the hashtag. So we've got a hashtag index, hashtag create, hashtag new, hashtag edit, hashtag show, etc. So this maps directly back to the to-do items controller. So if you open that up in your editor, let's look at the controller. So we've got a index method set up, a show method, a new, edit, create, an update, and a destroy, which maps directly to these actions here in the Rails routes. So that's an easy way to start figuring out a mental map of the app that you're working on. I mean, in this case, it's our to-do item or to-do app. So let's go back to the to-do item migration that we just created. So create to-do items. So we've got a change method, a change function defined. We've got a create table of to-do items, and then we'll be creating a new column called title with a type of string and timestamps, T for timestamps. So what we're going to do is we're going to run the migration because it's pending and the application won't let us do anything. So we can just keep hitting the up arrow here until we get our migration. Okay, so it's run the migration, we've got our to-do item table, and I've realized that we've made a slight mistake. We've forgotten to add a Boolean column, or a column to track a Boolean variable is completed. So if our to-do item is completed or not. So no problem. Even if we run the migration, what we can do is roll back the migration that we ran. So let's do that right now. We can roll back, which basically means undo the migration that we've just finished running. So we do that by typing in rake db rollback and then capital step equals 1. So basically just roll back the last step that we ran. So this will run And this will then, as you can see in the output, we've now dropped the new table to do items and reverted the change that we're making. So let's go back into this same migration file and let's add a t boolean underscore is underscore completed. So we were adding a new column here, giving it a boolean type and calling it is underscore completed. So now we can run the migration. We're confident that we've got the tables set up how we want it to behave. So let's go back to DB migrate. As you can see from the output, we've created the table. So let's, so our home page kind of stays the same. Our default URL stays the same. So let's do localhost 3000 / to-do _ items. And you can see we now get our list of to-do items, which right now is 0. There's no items in the app. So another thing we can work with is what's called the Rails console. So if you open up another terminal window and go into our application folder here, and then just type in Rails console or Rails C. It's up to you. So Rails console, and it'll bring up a interactive Ruby console that is that hooks directly into our application. It's running the same code that our server is currently using, the same Ruby code. So what we can do is we can pull all of our to-do items by to-do item. Usually when we work with Rails, the model is singular when working with it in the console. So it's not to-do items. We're not referencing it with to-do items. We're referencing it with to-do item singular. And let's do a find, or sorry, not a find. Let's do an all. So this will do a query of the database and pull back all of the to-do items in our list. So as you can see, we've got none here. So what we can now do is create a new one. We can just use, say, item equals to-do item dot new. And this will create a new item for us, a new to-do item, and assign it to item. So if we type in item, it'll come back with the all the properties of to-do item. So we've got an ID of nil, a title of nil, is completed nil, created at, and updated at. So these are the two fields that we get automatically when we use that t timestamps variable, or not variable, type right here in the migration. Rails will automatically convert t.timestamps into what we saw here, created at and updated at. Okay, so let's create a new title for this. So item.title equals first to-do item. So now what we can do is let's save this to the database. So item.save. And we can see some SQL here, and we can see that we've returned true. Basically, the save was a success. So let's go back to our browser. We're still running. We don't need to just reload the page, and you can see that we've already got our first to-do item coming back here in the app. So it's already in the system that even though we've been interacting with it through the Rails console. So another handy console command is last. So if we do to-do item.last, it'll come up with the last item that was added to the to-do array, or to-do collection, sorry. To-do items table. That's a lot more accurate. Okay. So what we can also do is a method called count. So to-do item.count, and that'll give us the size of the to-do items table. So in this case, just 1. So now what we want to do is, usually in an app, when you go to the home page, when you use the default URL, then instead of showing the yay, you're on Rails page, I want it to I want it to display our to-do items list, our to-do items page. So if we go back into the routes file, let's go into routes.rb. What we can do after the device for is we can add a route and then to-do items index. Sorry, route to, and then to-do items index. So we want to define our default URL as to go to the to-do items resource and use the index action. So let's go back to our browser and let's go to the default URL, and hooray, we're now seeing our list of to-do items. That's pretty cool. We've got a sort of the basics of to-do item handled for us from the Rails scaffolding, which we'll go through, and we've got the addition of users. So we kind of want to start to layer in account. See, it's because I screwed up earlier. We want to add in account support for our application. So basically restrict a to-do item to a particular account. So you know what? Let's just get this latest into Git. What we want to do is set up a relationship between our two models. So let's go into our account model. And what we want to do is we want to be able to say that a user has many to-do items. So all I have to do is type in has many to-do items. And then we need a flag or a parameter called dependent destroy. So what this will do is when we delete a to-do item, it will then delete, it'll be able to find the correct to-do items to delete depending on our relationship with to-do item. So then in vice versa, in the to-do item model, we have to map a belongs to _to and then user. So each to-do item has a reference back to user through user ID, and in each account we've got a reference back to the to-do item that belongs to it. So now we need to create a new migration to have the account ID column be a part of this to-do item. Otherwise, the app won't be able to track which to-do belongs to which account. So this should be account. Okay, so now what we can do is go back to the terminal window, and then let's type in Rails generate or Rails G migration add account ID column to-do items. Basically something expressive to help you remember what the purpose of that migration. You can really call it anything you want. Rails will prepend it with a timestamp, just so you don't have sort of duplicate migration files. So let's go ahead and open that new migration file up. It's in db migrate and then blah blah blah, whatever you had called it. So what we want to do is we want to add a new column. So add column to-do items, and we're going to call it account ID, and we'll give it a type of big int. So it'll match up the account ID and be a part of the to-do items table. So let's go ahead and run that migration. Rails db migrate. Okay, so it'll create the migration for us. We've run the migration, and we've now got a account ID within the to-do item. So if we want to see this in action, let's go back to our Rails console. Let's type in reload bang. So reload exclamation mark, and it'll reload everything, basically reload the app into the Rails console memory. And let's type in to do item all again. And you can see that in our data coming back, we've got our ID of 1, our title is completed, created at, updated at, all correctly specified. And now we've got a new column, account ID. So right now it's nil, which is not really a good thing. So we want to make sure that we're able to assign an account ID per to-do item that's created. So first, let's go back into our app controllers to-do items controller. And this is a lot of code that the scaffolding put into place for us already to help us with these new methods, which is great. So what we want to do with the help of devise, we want to add a new action called before action, and we want to authenticate the user. So these actions here, they run before anything else gets processed or handled in the controller. So for example, if we want to go to the home page, basically the get/to-do items, then before Rails processes the index handler, it'll call these before action triggers, listeners, and then execute them accordingly and handle any logic or anything that might prevent you from continuing on in this function. So right now we want to authenticate the user. This is a special helper method from the devise gem, which will just basically make sure that we're currently using an authenticated account. So let's go back and make sure our server is running. Yep. Oh, that's the console. Okay. So Rails S. Oh, it would help if I could type it in correctly. Rails S. Server's up and running. And let's go ahead and refresh the page. And oops, we spelt it wrong. Authenticate account, right? Authenticate account. Let's hit refresh, and there we go. So before we can even get to our list of to-do items, we have to log in. So we don't have a user right now to log in with, so let's use the sign up link, and let's create one. So let's call this one user@user.com, and then just a password of password. Whatever you want. Use the sign up, and it'll tell you that you've signed up successfully. So we're on our way. So what we need to do is now handle a way for well, first of all, I'll show you what's going to happen. So if we try and create a new to-do item, let's call it second to-do item. We'll get an error coming back saying the account must exist. So because we've made it because we've defined that relationship between the account and the to-do items, we now must have assign the account anytime we create a new to-do item. So let's go back into the code, and let's go into our to-do items controller. And in the let's do it in the create. So in the create, we've got a new to-do item we're working with, and what we want to do is we want to say we want to assign the to-do item account to be the current user. So the current user is another helper method of devise, and it'll basically just represent the object of the current account that we're using. So let's use, so we've assigned it to our account, and then let's go back and we should be able to save this now. So let's just refresh just to make sure. Okay, so new to do, we want to create a second to do item. Okay, my bad. Current account. So basically current underscore and then whatever model you've used with devise as the to represent the user or the account. So in our case, current account. So let's try that again. And the item was successfully created now. So if we go back, our first one is broken because we've got a null entry. So let's destroy that because it's got the null account entry there. And let's create a new one. Let's say finish recording tutorial. Create to do item. Okay. So now we've got our list. We've got our user assignment, which is pretty cool. And it lets us handle the correct creation of our to-do items. Okay, so let's go back into, we want to make sure that we restrict the items coming back to only match the current account that's logged in. So to do that, what we can do is we can create what's called a scope in Rails lingo. So if we go into the to-do model, let's go right here, to-do item model, sorry. So we've got our belongs to account. And what we can do is we can add a scope, which is basically like a helper method on coming up with a way to interact with the database. So let's say by account, and then we want to pass in a Lambda function. And we want to pass in, basically we want to go through our account and we want to return account ID. Whoops, account.id. So what we want to do here, what this is doing is we've created a scope. Basically, it's like a shortcut for SQL commands that you want to run on your object. So in this case, we're creating a shortcut called by underscore account. And in this shortcut, we're filtering down, we're using a where clause to filter down the to-do items that only belong to the account that we're currently using. So let's see this in action. If we go back to our to-do items controller, and in our getAll method, instead of getting all of the items, let's comment this out. Let's do at items equals, and then what we want to do is to-do item, and then by account, which is the name of the new scope, and then current underscore account. So what this will do is this will filter through, as I've just explained, it'll filter through the to-do items, just coming back with the ones that belong to the current user. And then we're also going to need it on our update method. So if we go down to our update, you'll notice here that we're updating, or sorry, not updating, in our set to do helper method here. We've got a set to do callback, which basically tries to find the current to do item based on the given current parameter. So what we want to do is just update this to use the scope that we've created. So by account, current user, and then .find params ID. So let's get this, maybe that's a little bit more legible here. So we use this helper method, set to do item. Let's see, we reference it right up here. So it's another callback before action. So before we run any of these, before we run the show, edit, update, or destroy methods, let's run this callback. So set to do item. So we then execute this before we go into the appropriate method or the corresponding method. Okay, so let's go back to the browser. It's still running. Let's hit refresh. Let's edit one. Oops, current account, I meant. Oh man, how embarrassing. Okay. current account. And let's make sure we've used current account up here. Yep. And so let's run that again. And so we're editing what we want. Finish recording tutorials. Okay, we can save correctly. And let's destroy one. Let's make sure we can destroy. Okay, so all of our options, or not options, all of our proper to-do items are coming back. Let's go ahead and create a, what we want to do right now is let's create some way to log in, log out, register users, basically update the CSS layout of this application. So back in our Rails app, if we go to the, first let me just check this in. Okay, so if we go into the views, layouts, application.html.erb, this is sort of the main file, the main HTML file that wraps all of our views within it as we go through our application. So you'll see this has all of the typical, HTML metadata, HTML sort of stuff, and then as we go through each, oh, we've stopped our app, so let's go back. Let's run our app again. As we go through each view, it's all wrapped around. We'll just use inspect here, just so I can show you what I mean. It's all wrapped around the basic HTML defined in that application HTML.erb file. So what we want to do is we want to import some Bootstrap CSS. So I'm going to go to JS deliver.com, and let's search for, it's a CDN for what we want, and let's search for Bootstrap. Oops. And we've got it right here. And so what we want to navigate into the dis CSS, and we just want to grab the copy HTML plus SRI tag, and we'll paste it right into our application layout file. So we've got it right here. So now, and then what we're going to do is we're going to update the body to wrap all of our views within a container class. And let's keep that yield in there. So the yield is a helper method within the front-end markup where we inject all of our child views that the app is trying to render depending on what page we're going. Okay, so we've got our style sheet coming in, and now what we want to do is we can put our navbar stuff right here in this HTML right here, but what I want to do is show you how to create a partial in Rails. So we use a %equals and then render partials header. So we just want to specify a we want to pull in some markup from another page. So back in our views layouts folder, if we go back to the views root folder and then we create a new directory, call it partials, and then within that we'll create a header underscore header.html.erb. So the underscore is kind of a it's a helper, a visual sort of thing to remind us that we're injecting this as a partial. I think all of the partials have to be defined that way. So I took the CSS from the Bootstrap 5 template, and we're just going to cut and paste it right in here. And then we're going to go through each thing. So we've got a sort of a brand icon defined, and so link to is another helper method in ERB files, HTML ERB files, and basically it creates a link. So it's a helper method to create a link. So we want to label the link home, the destination, the target URL is our root path of our app, and then we want to specify an HTML class of navbar brand. So what we're going to have to do is update this to, so if the account is signed in, then we want to display a link to my to-dos using the to-do items path. And then if we want to sign out, we want to destroy account session path. And I'll show you where to find these in just 1 second. You might recognize some of them. And then down here, if we're not logged in, then we'll have 2 buttons on the nav bar for logging in and signing up. So notice how we're using these, instead of defining an actual URL to go to, we're using these names. So basically to-do items path, destroy account session path, etc. So if we go back to our Rails routes, what we can do is Rails routes and then grep account. Let's just grep account. Okay, so we've got all this account stuff. So notice how we have, okay, right here. So we've got destroy account session path. And then back on the command on the terminal window here, through the terminal window here, we've got destroy account session, and then you, by convention, you add on underscore path for all of these to get the proper URL. So when Rails sees these, when the ERB file sees these, when it's processing the markup, it'll know to inject the correct path to this action. So destroy account session path. So let's go back and let's run the server. And hopefully I can demonstrate what I was just trying to explain. Let's go back and refresh our page. So now we've got our nav bar at the top. Oops, our container is a little bit wonky there. So let's go back in the code there in the layout, and let's just add a style here of a margin top of maybe 60 pixels. Okay, let's go back and refresh. And okay, good. So we've got our to-do items coming in. They're displaying them here. We've got our nav bar up top with a link, basically a link back to the home page, which is basically the same thing as a link of my to-dos. And then we can use the button here to sign out, which if you'll notice on the URL, when you hover over sign out, it's displaying /accounts/sign_out. And then if we sign out, we'll see the two buttons show up on the nav bar again, log in and sign up. So let's log in again. So it was user@user.com and the password was password. Okay. So now let's just update the markup a little bit and center this header here. So to do that, let's go into the app assets style sheets, and let's maybe put it in the to-do items SAS file. So what we can do is for every H1, we can just use text-align center. Just because we've used all of the views use H1 as the title for that view. So our index HTML. Oh, and I meant to explain. So the index HTML view here, index HTML maps the index method in our controller. So we have a show method here, which maps to the show HTML.erb file. Okay, and let's go back to the controller. Let's see. What other ones do we have to do? Edit. So our edit method here maps to the edit view template back in the view folder. So let's hit refresh, and we'll see that our to-do items title is now centered. Right on. Okay. So now, I think we're at a point where we can start writing some tests. So we've got our partials all set up. Well, partial. We've got our partials set up. We've got our items rendering. So let's get out of this. And I'm just going to add all this back to Git. Gemfile. And we want to run, we want to get into the development test group. And underneath the by-bug gem, let's go ahead and add rspec-rails. And then underneath, let's create a new group for testing. So group test do, and let's add 2 more gems in here. One called factory-bot rails, and another one called shoulda matchers. And then let's type in bundle install to get all of those gems pulled in and updated to our app. Okay, great. And then what we need to do is kind of similar to devise. We need to run a Rails G, Rails generate, and then rspec install. So it'll create some helper configuration stuff for us. And then this is all mentioned in the rspec documentation, how to set it up. So I'm just going to do this quickly here. So in our Rails helper, under the spec folder, there's a Rails helper and a spec helper. So spec helper we can leave alone, we don't need to touch. So in the Rails helper, what we'll do here is underneath this line here, line 8 that says add additional requires below this line, let's add just a note here, require devise after require rspec-rails. Okay, so we want to require devise, require relative, and this will be a file that we'll be creating right now called support/devise request spec helpers. Okay, and then further down in this file, we're going to be right here. So after the use transactional fixtures line, I'll be putting in some configuration options that are right from the devise and rspec websites. So we've got config include devise test controller helpers type controller, integration helpers type request, and request spec helpers type request. So then let's go back, or then let's go down to the bottom of this file after the end, and let's paste in one more little block of code to help set up rspec, and this is for the shoulda matchers. And again, this is just in the documentation. You don't really need to know. You don't really need to understand it right now. Just cut and paste it in, just to make sure everything works here. So within the spec folder, we now need to add a new file that we've just specified. So new, create a new directory called support, and then a new file, and we'll just call it devise request spec helpers RB. And I'm going to just cut and paste in what we need to put in. Again, this is really code that you should not need to know what's going on here. Well, all we're trying to do here is set up a way of being able to log in when we're running our tests. Otherwise, we run into real problems trying to test our controller, because we have to, in order to access any of the methods, we have to kind of let devise know that we're logged in with a valid user account. So I've left in the URL here of the page on the internet where I found this method. So basically all we're doing here is we're logging in with the given user account, which will then let us run all of the tests that we need to. So first, let's create some model tests, some model spec tests. So under the spec folder, create a new directory called models, and let's create a user spec. Okay, so at the top, we'll just need to require a Rails helper. And then this is the test suite for the account model. So let's call it account spec. Rename that to account spec. Okay. So rspec describe account type model do. And then for now, all we're going to have is an association test, basically a relationship test. So it should have many to-do items. So we just want to make sure that our, it should have many, it should have many to-do items. Okay, so let's go back to the terminal window and let's just type in rspec, and it'll run all of the files that are within the spec folder. So right now it passes, which is great. So an account should have many to-do items. So let's write a to-do item spec. So in our spec models folder, let's create another new file and let's call it to-do item spec-rb. And then at the top here, let's require the Rails helper again. And then a comment here, test suite for the to-do item model. So let's do rspec describe to-do item type model do. Okay, so let's also do a relationship test. So it should belong to account. So a to-do item should belong to an account. Okay, and then let's add a validation test. So it should validate presence of title. So one thing we didn't go through when we created our to-do item model is when we save, before we save a model, we should make sure that title has something in it. We don't really want to, it's not really useful to save a to-do item to the database without any title in it. So let's go ahead and run the test again with rspec. And now we come back with a failure. And we've got a failure because we can currently save an empty string as the title. So let's go back and fix that. Let's go back into our model, to-do item model. There we go, to-do item model. And underneath the scope, let's now add validates presence of title. So now we can we've used the test to make sure and successfully point out that we're not validating the presence of title. So let's go back into the here, you know what? Let's oh no, we won't be able to prove it that way. Okay, let's type in rspec again. And now all the tests pass. We've updated the validation. Hooray! So now what we can do, the one last thing to go through is the controller spec or request spec. So what we want to do is let's create in the spec folder, let's create a new folder and call it requests. And within that, let's call it to-do items spec. A spec in front of us, so let's go ahead and let's require our Rails helper as we did with the other spec tests. And we want to describe what this one is for. And this one is for describing our to-do items controller point. And we're going to be writing a request tests. So let's do that now. So first things first, we're going to need to create a current account. So this is basically like a dummy account that we're going to need to log in to log in before we run our tests. So current account equals account first or create, another helper method from Rails. So let's define an email of user@user.com, a password of password, and a password confirmation field, confirmation of password. Okay, and then let's define a set of valid attributes. So it'll be an ID of 1, a title of test, and is completed to be false. And then let's create an object for some invalid attributes. So let's set that up here. So let's see an ID of, let's call this ABCD, ABCDEE, and then a title of a string, or not a string, a title of an integer, and then let's add one for is completed to be another string value, so ABCDEF. So that should be some invalid attributes for creating a new to-do item. Okay, so first we want to create a section, so describe the main get for our index file. Basically the home default route for all of our to-do items, so / to-do items. So we want to test that it renders a successful response. Okay, so we want to sign in our current account, make sure we're signed in, and then we want to create a new to-do item. We'll pass in the valid attributes, and then the to-do item account is going to be equal to the current account. And then let's save it, and then we'll make a GET request to the to-do items URL, and we're going to expect that the response is going to be successful. Okay, let's go ahead and run that. Our spec, and it passes. Right on. Okay, so let's create another method. What we want to do is, let's go back here. So let's describe get new, and we want to make sure that this also renders a successful response. So again, we want to sign in with the current account. And then we want to get the new to-do item URL, and we are expecting the response to be successful. So let's go ahead and run this one, and it should pass okay. Nice. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to create a test for a GET request to a specific to-do item. We want to make sure that that passes. So let's do a describe get, and we'll just call it edit do. So we want to make sure that it renders a successful response. So let's sign in with the current account, and then we want to create a to-do item with the valid attributes. We want to assign account to be current account, and then we want to save it. And then we want to get the edit to-do item URL, passing in the to-do item that we've saved. So basically it's going to grab the ID from the to-do item that we're passing into the URL, and we're expecting the response to be successful again. Let's go ahead and run that. All right, test pass. So now we get into a little more of the trickier ones. So when we send a post request to our to-do items controller, so basically when we're passing the form data, then we are going to be creating a new to-do item based on that past form data. So we're going to be describing the post create do, and then we're going to be declaring a context. So we're going to have two contexts, so with valid parameters and with invalid parameters, if I can spell parameters correctly. Okay, so with valid parameters, it creates a new to-do item. So let's sign in as the current account, and then we expect that the post to-do items URL with our params given in the valid attributes. We expect that it will, once we return from the post, that the count of to-do items will change in the database by 1. So we're adding 1 because we've created 1 successfully. So now with we're going to sign in. We're going to basically copy and paste this test to the invalid parameters. Only we're going to make sure that for the to-do item, we're going to pass in the invalid attributes. And we're going to expect that the actual changes don't happen at all because it's an invalid. We're passing in invalid attributes. So let's go ahead and run this. Oh, and what is it? Sign in is not available. Oh, right. We forgot to surround this with an it. So it does not create a new to-do item. Do. Sorry about that. And then let's fix up the spacing in there. Okay, so now we should be able to run this. It was changed by 1. How is it changed by 1? Okay. So because we're working within the same describe method here, we want to make sure that when we do the test isn't resetting the items created, and so we want to make sure that we're not adding an additional 1 to the to-do items count, which we've already created 1 here, so we want to make sure that that item count stays the same. The to-do item count stays the same. Okay, so now let's test the update. So we want to update our to-do item with some new attributes, new values. Sorry. So let's make sure that these updates are processed correctly. Okay, so let's create a new context with valid parameters. So let new attributes do, let's see, ID of 1, a title of new to-do item, and then is completed. We're going to set that to true. Okay, so it updates the requested to-do item. Okay, so we want to sign in again as the current account, and then we want to create a to-do item. With the valid attributes, and we want to set the account to be the current account, and then we want to save it. So to-do item.save, and then we want to use the patch to-do item URL helper method, and we want to pass in the parameters to-do item of the new attributes. And then we're going to we're going to call a method called reload, which basically reloads the object from the database because we're now expecting it to update from passing it in to the put URL or patch URL. So we're going to update the item, and now we're going to expect that the to-do item title field to equal the new attributes title field. And then we also expect the to-do item is completed property to equal true. Okay, let's run this. Oh, what did we get? We got false. New attributes. So is completed. Of course. So in the to-do items controller, we're passing in, we're basically setting our params. So we want to allow. So basically, there's a security setting on this model. There's a security helper to make sure that we're not processing garbage data coming in from the request. So right now, currently by default, we've got a permit field of just the title, and we need to update this to also allow the is completed field. So when we want to pass in the Boolean, like we're trying to do in our unit test, or in our request test, sorry, then it'll be able to update it and then set it accordingly. So we found a bug with the help of unit tests. Right on. Sweet. Okay, let's go back to the test spec. Okay, so all that looks good, and let's create one for, did I already create one for destroying? Nope, let's do that now. So let's describe delete, destroy, do. So it destroys the requested, or the given to do item. Do. So we want to sign in the current account, and then we want to create a to-do item. So to-do item equals to-do item.new with the valid attributes, and to-do item.save it. Oh wait, account equals current account, of course. Can't forget that. And then we want to save it. And then we're expecting that when we pass this same to-do item to the to-do item delete URL, it will change the to-do item count by -1. Okay, let's go ahead and test that out. Ta-da! Awesome. Well, I had a really fun time putting this together for you. If you enjoyed what you saw, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. If you didn't like what you saw, then I really want to thank you for watching things up to this point and giving this a shot. Leave a comment in the comments down below if this helps you at all, or if there's something you're missing from this to-do application, and I'll be sure to put that in a future video. All the links to everything should be in the description down below, the links to the source code, and everything I've been referencing I'll drop in the description down below. Hope you're having a good afternoon, day, wherever you are, and we'll see you next time. Thanks everyone. Peace.